And he had forgotten to tune up, so every bass note, because James could play these really comprehensive bass parts in his playing, so he was a whole step off and everything, and I was not going to stand there and take it. It's my memory if you have a friend.
First rule in session work, stick up for yourself. Right?
No, when you're talking about session work, there's so many things that come in. It's not just chops. It's really about how you relate to people. When you finish a track, you go in and you listen back, you talk about it. You're engaged as a player, and not just kind of sitting there saying, "I played my part. Now I'm gonna."
And you've talked about that, about going into a session, and sometimes the vibe in a session can be less than completely positive, but always being positive, always listening to the playback, kind of being engaged.
Yeah, it's absolutely important. There's the thing that to me has always been important about a session is that might be the only time that person you're recording for ever gets a shot. So you really have to give them your best shot. I'm maybe leaving that session, or any of us going to another session. Our job isn't going to end with that date, but their career can live or die by that date. So you give them 100% of what you've got of them. It's like joining a band every day. You're not in Chili Peppers and that's all you do.
Yeah.
Every day you're in new bands and you treat it like that.
Yeah. And in doing that, and doing that over a long period of time, each of you have become songwriters, producers, people who now, not only do you play with great artists, but you guide them. And I'm wondering the experience. I'm assuming that the experience you've had working as a session player only feeds that ability to deal with the artist. You had a particular experience with Warren Zima.
Yeah, well, like Danny spoke about Peter Asher. Peter Asher was a great influence in what you're supposed to be doing when you're producing a record. You're supposed to, first of all, above everything, make your artist feel like singing, because if your artist isn't going to be comfortable enough to sing, you have nothing going. It doesn't matter how good the band plays. But Peter would also make all of us feel needed, important, and you have to know how to do that. And Warren was a tough nut to crack, let's say. He was definitely putting up a fight.
Yeah.
But
what did Jackson say to you when he came to you to ask you to co-produce Excitable Boy?
Well, I did an interview when I was traveling with Linda in Europe, and I'd never been anywhere before. Well, Warren and I met with the Everly Brothers in 1970, and then after that, I was out with Linda, and someone approached me about Warren's record, the record that Jackson produced, and I'm thinking, oh yeah, so cool. I'm over here in England. I'm over here in France. No one's going to read this. Who cares, So I said, what do you think of Jackson's work on Warren's record? I said, well, to tell you the truth, I think Jackson really had his hands way too full, and he didn't really know what he was doing, because Warren is, a nightmare to work with, and there were so many songs coming at you so fast, and so many guys in the studio, and he had his hands too full, basically. So, and I'm feeling really good about myself, and I get home, and the phone rings, and it's Jackson has never called me before. I just met him during that record, actually. So, and I pick up the phone. Hey, Waddy, it's Jackson. What? How are you, man? I said, I'm good. He goes, yeah, I know. I read your interview. You what? I'm sorry, what? You read what? I read your interview, the one that said I didn't know what I was doing and I had my hands too full. Oh, you did, huh? I said, well, he goes, you're right. You're absolutely right. He says, and that's why I'm calling you. I went, huh? He goes, I need you to co-produce the next record with me for Warren. And I went, you gotta be kidding. You don't even know me. He goes, I know you better than I know most people. Now I know where I stand with you. And he says, but the reason I need you there is because he won't listen to me now. We did the one record, he won't listen to a word I say, but he'll listen to you right now. And believe me, that'll change after we do this record, which is exactly what happened. But, so that's how he brought me into it, and I was elated.
Yeah, and that record, we could talk about specific records that each of you guys have played on, and that record in particular, in kind of the run up to this, I've been listening to it quite a bit. It just stands up. It stands up. It's remarkable. And you know, Danny, I have to go back just for a second because I know that you had expressed a desire when you were younger to be in a band, but not just any band. You were enamored of bands like Booker T and the MGs. You know, what was it about Booker T or the dudes in Motown that interested you?
I was always drawn to, and I don't know why, but I was always drawn to the ensemble, the sound of the ensemble. I love the idea of a bunch of cats creating a groove and making something happen. And I love the idea of going in the studio every day with the same cats and tearing it up.
Yeah.
And those were the guys that really influenced me the most.
Yeah, yeah, and that seems to continue to happen.
I have a story about that that's
Yeah.
kind of
Go
interesting,
ahead.
because I came up a little at a different time. This was kind of over. But again, I took advantage of the fact, had the advantage that these guys' names were on the records that I listened to. So I knew who they were and was now paying attention to who played the records. But I still was more focused on the songwriters and the singers. And I went to see a show that all these guys were on. And a James Taylor show. And I couldn't listen to James. I listened to what they were doing, and that's what taught me. That's why this is so exciting, is that was when I realized that night what the players are doing to make the song great. And I knew who they were because their names were on the records and I'd been paying attention.
Yeah, and riffing off of that a little bit, the unfortunate fact is we're kind of in a moment here in music where those names get lost. You were talking about how the Wrecking Crew never got, never got its due. Well, now we're in this position where, streaming and all this stuff, and we don't see, I know I have friends out here, my friends here tonight, and we spend hours poring over albums and line notes, and who played on it, and where was it recorded, and
They're not made that way anymore. That's the thing. You have people in different cities.
Yeah.
It's a completely different paradigm.
yeah,
There's someone who does the drum track, then they send it off to someone who does this other part,
Mhm.
then there's someone in Nashville writes the melody, and someone writes the words. So it wouldn't even be that interesting to look at a liner note.
yeah, but
That's why there's 52 writers on every song now.
Well, there is that. There is that, and at the risk, and I don't want to necessarily dwell on this, but at the risk of sounding like a bunch of old guys, which we all are. God knows in August I will do. Don't even go there. It's changed. The business of making music has changed, and I know Lee, you've talked about, kind of, what session dates are like now.
It's interesting because there are a lot of sessions that really harken back to what it was like then. We're in the like in real studios with 4 or 6 guys, girls, whoever the musicians are. The real problem is not really the music, it's the business. To me, that's the problem. I get calls from artists after we do their albums and they go, any ideas what we can do with this? Because first off, there's not a label, so they're either self-funded or somebody who's had dreams of being involved in music, who made money somewhere else is
Paying for it.
bankrolling it.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to what do you do with this, nobody really has a clue what to do. So, when you're sitting there and you look on your website and you've had, 1 million hits, if that was a dime each or a penny each, that would be a viable business. But you're really not. It's not monetizing.
Yeah.
It's also all these people are having to look for other work to pay their bills. It's a really strange time, and then like you said, when it comes down to first off, everybody, you have almost 2 generations now that think music should be free.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I do clinics for bass players, and the first thing I ask is how many of you guys download, and they all raise their hand, and I go, so basically you're trying to go into a business that you're killing. It just doesn't make any sense. But it's a really difficult time, and like you said, the voyage of discovery is what's really been hurt. Like when I remember as a kid going to Wallach's Music City, and you just going through those bins and you'd find an album that had a cool art on it. You didn't know anything about it, but somehow it intrigued you.
Yeah.
And you could look and see all these names, and there were records that I bought because I saw names on them of guys, you know, that I recognized they're playing on it. And I go, this has got to be cool. He's, you know, Leon Russell's on it. It's got to be great. Well, now you can't find them.
You could go into a booth and play the record.
And you could go in and preview it. But now, you know, when you're streaming, you don't see any credits. You don't see any, there's no album art.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, for me, my personal mantra has always been, don't become an old fart. Because I like working and I don't want to give up working. So you don't really whine about this stuff. But it's really a drag because there really was a heyday that this was all really magical. And
By the way, I'd be glad to whine about it if I could. Go ahead. Which is very simple, that so many records are made piecemeal now. As Leland was saying, one guy at a time, one guy at a time. Then it's all put through the deflavorizing machine, so that it's also corrected and so you know, moved and so on the dime, so you know, whacked to the grid, as it were.
Yeah.
That you don't have any. There's no blood at all. There's no blood and guts, and it's not as soulful. Soulful comes from people. It doesn't come from this manufactured stuff.
So what do you guys tell young musicians? Because I'm sure you come in contact. I'm sure you go to NAMM. You know you do clinics and workshops. All of you guys. What do you tell young musicians?
It's tough, you know, because I work with a lot of young musicians that teach, but also in production, and it's very hard to be positive about, because even all of us had these when we came up and when I came up, even though it was a little after, but not that much. If you were reasonably good, you worked every day. There was at night you played in the club, you got paid for it. There was studios, so by the time after a few years you'd had a lot of experience, and you can't. There's no way to jump step that. You can't just get good. You can sit home and practice, not the same thing.
Yeah.
So what's difficult now is the opportunities are so few. Like literally growing up in New York City, every night you could play. And every day, all day long. It was a different kind of studio session. By the time I came into it, was more movies and TV and jingles. I was in the studio all day, every day. And it doesn't exist for them. So I guess you try to impress upon them, play with people. I say, like, make your own sessions. You know, you gotta. There is no shortcut to playing.
Yeah.
So I had the pleasure of seeing a little short preview of a Steve Martin masterclass, and his answer to that question is the best one I've ever heard. When someone asked him, so as a young musician, you know, what advice can you give me? And he said, you gotta be good.
That's it.
When I've done, I don't do a lot of clinics and master classes, but the ones I've done, it's really hard to temper reality with, you know, what's going on, but you also don't want to discourage them, because in that room could be somebody who could change the world. You just don't know. So I always tell them, I said, it's kind of like Powerball. You know, they say, you know, your odds of winning are 175 million to 1, but the next day on TV there's some knucklehead holding this big check. And they won. So somebody in that room, or a couple people, might actually succeed in the business, but the odds of you being able to actually have this be your career is really difficult. But I work with a lot of different people now who have had success in other businesses and come back to music because they're financially set, and they still are good artists, so they end up doing it that way.
Yeah.
But that's rare too. But it's a difficult time. You really don't want to discourage people, but you do want to give, like MI and Llama and all these schools, the one thing they don't teach is you graduate on Friday, what are you facing Monday?
What do you do?
Yeah, they're just collecting their check for your being a student there, but you suddenly come out of there with all these skills and chops and all this stuff, and there's nothing going on for you unless you know, as he said, just kind of network and meet people and try to put a band together and do things it's a tough time. It's
Yeah.
not easy.
Yeah, and there's, as I said, when you guys came up, there was this community sense, and I don't mean to overplay that, but it was really the case.
Well, there was enough work where there wasn't like any kind of pettiness. You coveted, it's not like coveting your work there and not wanting to share it. Everybody was so giving, and there was such a community.
Yeah.
That it was fabulous.
And I assume it was the same for you guys, but you had to have other people, because you had to have subs. It's like, if I was playing a Broadway show, I had 6 guys who, they had to be friends of mine, because if I had a session, you play the show, I'll do the
I'll go
session.
do this, yeah,
So it was naturally beneficial to be a community.
yeah.
Yeah, we had the benefit as well of Peter Asher, once again, our great mentor. Not only would he hire us to play in the studio with all these great artists, but he made sure that we toured with them. So we went from the studio out on the road. So we had the benefit of not only earning a living from being in the studio, but also from working on the road. And that just doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up. So it's one thing to be in the studio and playing down songs and making sure they, sound as good as you can make them. It's another thing entirely when you start to take it out on the road. Talk a little bit about kind of that transition, if you will, from having been guys in the studio to, okay, now I'm out on tour playing for audiences, and you kind of get one shot to impress the group. Does that change your mindset at all? Are there things you need to do differently?
Well, we kind of grew up doing those things. I mean, but when we started going on the road with James and Carol and Jackson, we were just learning how to do that ourselves. I mean, we had played live before, but not in front of 3,000 people. So it's a different mindset. You're performing live in front of people. You only have one shot to do each song, so you have to be